Julia, please join me here. And product marketing is a lot about alignment, getting everybody on the same page, getting everybody pulling the same direction. There's a lot of cats to herd, and Julia is going to tell us all about that. So thank you very much, Julia.
Thanks for having me. Can you guys hear me? Can you see me okay? Okay, good. I'm seeing the thumbs up. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Oh, it's weird. I can't seem to share the file, but I think this should work. And one of the moderators, do you guys know how I can share a tab? I think it's just, there we go, Chrome tab. Sorry about that. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, I'll leave it again.
Yeah, all right. Can you guys, all right, so you guys can now see the presentation, correct? Okay. Yes, all right, great. So, okay, cool. So I'm going to talk about stakeholder alignment strategies for product marketers. My name is Julia. I work on product marketing and product strategy at startup and scale-up companies, both in the US and in Europe. I'm originally from New York City, but I've been based in Berlin for the last 4.5 years. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be talking to you about aligning with stakeholders and sharing tactical strategies that have worked for me on getting the most out of those relationships. This is not scientific by any means. It's just the stuff that has worked for me. Obviously, feel free to customize this to your organizations. So what is a stakeholder? We know that basically it's anyone with a vested interest. And in our traditional definitions of product marketing, stakeholders are anyone from customers, suppliers, investors, prospects, etc. But for the purposes of this talk, we're just going to focus on internal stakeholders. And so when we say internal stakeholders, this actually just means everyone in the organization. So product marketing is the quintessential cross-functional role, right? It requires effective collaboration with every team in the organization and at all levels of seniority. I like to look at it like this. So it's basically we're the center of the wheel, right? We serve as the strategic link to almost every department. And you know, this kind of diagram here, we see that product marketing sits at the intersection of product, of engineering, service and operations, sales and revenue, other marketing teams such as growth marketing, customer success, and so on and so forth, depending on the organization and the product. You know, this is a great way to categorize large groups of stakeholders, but when you start mapping stakeholders at your organization, it's important to actually get as specific as possible as to who is who in each of these teams and departments and the role that they play and what information they could provide you with and who can help you with what. So the way I like to do it is I like to use a circular tiered system for grouping my stakeholders. I've seen it done in other ways. I've seen it mapped in a matrix format. I've seen more detail, less detail. Ultimately, how you choose to do it will depend heavily on your organization's specific structure and size and stage and so on. I also try to keep it simple by only having 4 tiers, but you can customize this to add more tiers if your organization has more levels of hierarchy or more people involved, and also depending on the complexity and maturity of the product, right? I mostly work with SaaS products, but if you're working with something deeply, deeply technical, you know, you potentially have solution engineers getting involved, and there's a pre-sales process. So, you know, you want to make sure that all of those fit in as well. So let's dive right into what each of these actually is. So the first one is the core. This is the core group. So these are the people who get shit done. I call them the owner executors or the team in the trenches. This can be product managers, designers, marketing managers, copywriters, engineers, etc. Whoever is on your core team of actually bringing the project or the initiative or whatever you're working on in question across the line. So it's the people doing the work, and you should look at them as your inner circle. So these are your ride or dies. And The next layer is called tier 1. So I've mostly worked with earlier stage companies where there are fewer employees, so I only need one tier here, but at a larger organization, you could potentially split up tier 1 into a tier 1 and 2 if there are more employees and more layers and more stakeholders. So tier 1 stakeholders are basically everyone who has to have a seat at the table. So this would typically be your team leads, your directors, your heads of. So people with an opinion whose teams or processes could be impacted. In this tier, I also include influencers, amplifiers, and blockers. So influencers are people within your organization who can actually contribute substantially to whatever that product marketing initiative is, but aren't necessarily part of the core group. So maybe they're only supplying one small piece, but it's still important, their contribution. Then you also have your amplifiers. So these are the people who can grease the wheels in the organization. So, they're very well connected. They have good relationships, a lot of charisma, and they can seed ideas and kind of amplify your message. And then there's also your blockers. So these are the people who can actually throw a wrench or pull an emergency brake. So just a quick kind of show of hands, has anyone ever had a product launch or an initiative paused or stalled by someone who was a blocker? Yeah. Okay, good. I'm seeing the thumbs up. Great. Cool. So, all right. So now we get to our next layer. So these are the strategic stakeholders. So these are VPs, department leads, and executive sponsors. So these are the people who have to be bought in at the top. Otherwise, any relevant information or rollouts or anything that will be done in a future stage will not be able to happen unless they're bought in. So things that need to be distributed through large teams, like a large product rollout, you need to have your strategic stakeholders involved. So this highly depends on the stage of the organization and also each executive's capacity and appetite for being involved. So this is why I caveated executive sponsors with an asterisk. Some execs want to be involved, or they at least want to know what's going on at high level. I think in larger organizations, what tends to happen is they're a little bit more removed, but it's definitely important to have at least one executive sponsor. I think the rule of thumb here as well, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later, is whet that person's appetite, right? When in doubt, ask about their desire to be involved and ask how often, and wanting how much information. I've also put in finance as a stakeholder as a caveat. So I've never really viewed finance as a stakeholder because I've mostly worked at organizations where the teams have control over the budgets and the budgets are set in advance. But depending on your organization and organizational processes and your responsibilities and how things are set up, if you need finance at the table because you need budget and because that's important to success of your initiative, then finance should get a seat at the table as well. And then finally, we have the organization-wide stakeholders. So this is everyone else. These are the entry-level employees. These are the teams that don't normally contribute to bringing products to market. They don't normally contribute in these activities. So, a golden rule here is, and a golden understanding, I think, from behavioral science, and people love to be involved, right? So the best way to get buy-in across the organization, in my experience, has actually been seeking out strategic opportunities to let non-obvious sources have a voice. This also opens up the potential for a really novel idea or insight to emerge. And I think this is really the power of product marketing, to be able to have access to all of those voices. So a tactical example of how you can do this is, for example, we were working on, at my previous company, we were working on redesigning the central product page, right? So it was an e-commerce site. We were redesigning the structure and layout of that page. So there's a lot that goes into it. It was, a 9-month tiered project. But one of the things we were able to do was we were actually able to share the prototype for that new page with the entire company, since everyone's work touches that one page. And it was so central. We were able to get their feedback, and it actually made the page a lot better. We got some really valuable insights out of that. So don't discount who your stakeholders are and where they can come from. So this chart is obviously not the end all be all. It's just a point to get started, segmenting your stakeholders similar to the way you segment your customers. And obviously within each of these, there's still a lot of diversity. And in the next section that I'm going to take you through, I'm going to go through some actual tactics on how to make the most of each stakeholder relationship. So I've grouped my tactics into 5 themes. And I think I have 20 minutes with Q&A. Okay, cool. We're good on time. And so I'll start diving into these right away. So the first theme, and by the way, these slides are word heavy, and the reason why is because I know they'll be published. So I want you guys to be able to have access to what the tactics actually are. So I apologize for that. Not generally the way to make slides, but I'd rather you have the content. So guiding principles for the relationship. I think when starting any kind of new relationship, you want to establish what your guardrails are, right? What are your guiding principles? How is this relationship going to function? One first big thing, everyone knows Stephen Covey, influential business author. He said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. So, this is a core skill in product marketing, right? We understand the end user. We understand the customer. We understand the buyer, the market, the journey, the product. And so in the same way, we actually have to understand the stakeholder. So what are the stakeholders' needs from a business perspective? What are their concerns? How can we meet them? Where are they struggling? What's going on there? And really prioritize understanding what their business unit does or what their team is working on, and align yourself with that. I think the next thing is find the stakeholders' why and confirm it verbally. So, we have to understand the people we work with and what makes them tick, right? A why is someone's holistic ethos. You can watch the Simon Sinek talk. Who are they as a person, as a professional? What do they value? What do they live and breathe every day? This will give you a lot of insight into how to work with this person effectively. And I think something important here, which is why I even put it in the header, is to confirm that verbally. Like, find out what that why is and confirm it back to the stakeholder. Acknowledgement is the first step to alignment. And I think it's very powerful when someone says something and you repeat it back to them, because not only does it make them feel heard, it makes them feel understood. And I think that goes a long way for building relationships. I think, it depends really who you're speaking to, how you want to pitch things, right? But in general, and this is the golden rule for working with engineers or more technical people, you always start with the mission first, right? And then you get to the solutions after. But people truly need to understand, and the same way in a stakeholder relationship, right? They need to understand you, you need to understand them, and only once there's this shared understanding can things actually move forward. So I think something else to align on, and this is something that you can align on repeatedly, especially when things get a little contentious, is we're on the same team, right? And I'll talk through some more strategies on how to align on actual goals, but I think it's important to acknowledge that with your stakeholders. So, if you're meeting with your chief revenue officer and you say, hey, we're on the same team. I want to get to the same number of logos or amount of revenue or whatever, that North Star metric is. I want to get to that same thing as much as you do. Let's figure out how to do it together. And then it becomes more of a teamwork effort. Something else that I think is important is expectation setting. Expectation setting is important in any relationship, in any role. But I think expectation setting here is more about what can product marketing do for this stakeholder. And I think that a lot of the times, especially in earlier stage companies, when there's the first product marketing hire being made, a lot of people have a lot of expectations. And because the discipline is misunderstood, not well known, people begin to project their own expectations onto it. So they think that, everything's going to happen and it's going to happen all at once this person has been hired. And obviously, these things are all iterative. They're all experiment. We're always experimenting. We're always trying new things. And that's kind of the core ethos of marketing and product in general. But I think it's important to understand, what are their business units' goals, right? Like, what is going to move the needle? Where are they struggling? And what are their deal breakers? And when we talk about deal breakers, I want to be specific that these are strategic deal breakers. So an example here was a CRO at a company that I worked with. He said very early on that whatever we do with the product, whatever we do with marketing, whatever we do with our pricing, he wants to make sure that we don't limit users in any way. And he wanted to make sure that that message was embodied throughout product, throughout marketing, throughout everything that we were doing. And so having that understanding as a guiding principle of, hey, this is something that's really important to this person. It makes total business sense. We're going to do this. And to establish that, I think, is very, very effective. And then I think this is also an opportunity to ask what their desire to be involved in. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to actually engage, but you should ask them, do they want to have meetings? How often? And, how much information do they want and what information do they want? So when in doubt, just ask. And then I think, we get to this psychology over time and how to get the best out of people. So over time, as you get to know your stakeholders, you're going to understand what is each stakeholder's strength, what is each stakeholder's weakness, and what information can they provide you with? How can you help them? And how can you get the best out of them and allow them to be successful? So that's kind of to start things off. My second big theme is how to engage with stakeholders. So, there's a famous kind of adage that early and often is best. I don't actually believe in often, but I believe early and in a regularly scheduled cadence. So this means meetings, this means one-on-ones, this means town halls with, departments or groups. You need to cater the format to your audience. But a one-on-one, for example, is a really great opportunity to make a case or get buy-in or take someone through a prototype. And I think what's important is to make sure that these meetings are really update meetings versus brainstorms or concrete working sessions, which should be separate. Something that has worked for me is having a running log of topics in a shared document that both parties have access to. And in the interim time between the two meetings, can put topics and questions, agenda items in there. And so when you show up, you actually have a built-in agenda already ready, and that meeting is super effective. Sometimes executives are really busy. So what I typically do is, because they don't have time to make those notes ahead of time, I actually spend the first 3-4 minutes of the meeting in silence, letting them put their stuff into the document. So, you can also do that. I think something else that's important is to be mindful of information overload. So the same way we curate our content to each of our target segments and our target customers, we also have to curate the content to each stakeholder, and understanding what makes them tick and what they care about is obviously helpful in doing that because the things that they care about. A meeting before the meeting. So ideas have to be socialized and people have to be prepared. And sometimes it's important to, when, especially when you're getting together in a larger group or in a group with a lot of C-level stakeholders, you want to make sure that everyone is well prepared and you're making the most use of everyone's time. So it's actually good, and, it takes up a lot of your time, but it's good to have in the days leading up to that meeting, meetings with each stakeholder before that meeting to set expectations, to align on, what you want to get out of it, and to prepare them with what they need to actually, make things happen. I think something else that's been referenced in some of the previous presentations, so I'll just touch on it very quickly, is to have a published, centralized, and easily accessible collateral. So many organizations that I see, everything is just a mess all over the place. There are like 3 different shared drives. No, documents are locked down for editing. No one knows where anything is. So roadmaps, reports, resources, shared drives for everything. And honestly, if you see that your people aren't using the shared drives but asking for that information, meet them where they are. Put the links in the one-on-one documents for reference, right? If it makes an executive's life easier and that can help you get to an outcome on your product marketing activities faster, by all means. And then I think, the last point on how to engage is with empathy. And I think we all have that, but product marketers have a very unique platform from which we can act as facilitators, as connectors, and as amplifiers. We have access to a lot of people within the organization. And so, approaching that with equity and with empathy and with an eye for marginalized voices, I think is really important. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I want to make sure there are time for questions. So the third theme is how to make the relationship symbiotic, right? Meaning that it's a two-way street. So it's two-way flow of information. Take the stakeholder on the journey with you. Offer updates, show prototypes, ask for their opinions and feedback. I've caveated this with an asterisk. It's important to not only ask for feedback regularly and often, but it's also important to document this feedback so that not only it's not lost, but the stakeholder feels heard and knows they were heard. If you're asking for feedback on something, set a deadline or take the feedback live. Meet your stakeholder where they are. I think it's also great to be able to give estimates on what's in progress, be a voice for product, what's to come, where the focus is now. Show them stuff that's not even complete. Really take them on the journey with you and educate and share insights related to customer evidence and value. As product marketers, we have access to so much from so many different sources that I think part of our role is to synthesize that and really distribute it throughout the organization. I think something else that's important to note here is that when you are making requests of your stakeholders, and you can and should be, they should be clear and specific requests with deadlines. So know exactly what you want to get out of them. Someone's participation leads to their commitment and their investment, but it also leads to accountability. And so we want to make sure that things can move along and that stakeholders don't become blockers. I think another great strategy that I've used for getting information out of stakeholders is asking them for deeper details on qualitative feedback from the market. So, customer-facing teams, of course, have way more insights. And I think that context is really helpful. And finally, there's transparency and consensus on goals. And we'll talk about this more in the next theme, but basically share your goals, ask for theirs, work together to create shared ones. And I think this kind of transparency also fosters the right context for prioritization discussions. And those can get contentious, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Cool. So the second to last one is the fourth theme is this could be a topic in and of itself, so I'm only going to touch on this briefly, especially because every other speaker also covered this. So tie your product marketing activities to business outcomes. Most organizations, most companies operate in a framework like OKRs or KPIs, or they have some kind of North Star metrics. Even at early stages, align your product marketing activities to those metrics. And I think something here that's really, I've gotten a lot out of my stakeholder relationships with that is utilize your stakeholders to help quantify the projected impact and actually share those goals. So for example, I've had instances where I've said, hey, sales is asking, or the CRO is asking for a landing page to be built, and we're saying, okay, well, we're strapped for resources. So, if we build this page, how much do you think will convert in the next quarter, right? Like give me your back of the envelope math so we can make the case together. Something else that I think is really important here, this is probably my product management background speaking, but I think it's super important for product marketers to build a roadmap and a reporting framework. I structure my product marketing roadmap very similar to a product roadmap. I think it's also important to have a reporting framework. This will depend on what stage your product is in, what metrics you're measuring, how much data you can get. But as much as you can tie your successes to higher level business outcomes, you're moving in the right direction. And obviously, these need to be updated regularly, easily accessible, and so on and so forth. And then finally, I think one of the last pieces is to speak up. So product marketing is in a very unique position, right? We sell internally because we're consistently iterating on messaging, on positioning, on all of these product marketing activities, just like the previous speakers mentioned. And progress doesn't happen overnight. So because product marketers have a very unique platform, if you see or hear something that's useful or insightful or innovative, use the platform that you have, use the access that you have to strategic stakeholders to say something constructive and bubble it up to the forces that can actually help make it happen. And I know we're running low on time, so very quickly, I'd be remiss if I didn't include a slide on talking about what to do when things get hairy. So these are things that have worked for me. It's not a magic bullet. Priorities are always going to compete. I saw a bunch of thumbs up earlier that, you've all been in situations where things have gotten a little bit hairy. This is why I think it's really important to have an easily communicable product marketing roadmap with both short-term plans versus long-term plans. We know that in a world of limited resources, sometimes priorities have to shift. And some stakeholders might lose in the short term if, the initiatives that concern them don't get worked on right away. So I think it's important to position things as, it's not a no, it's a not right now. And also to show them, it's not right now, but, it'll be in 3 months or 4 months or et cetera, wherever it fits on your roadmap. But things can get heated. And so in the situations where things get heated, I see product marketing as a facilitator. So basically, take your unique position with deep understanding of the customer, the market forces, internal processes, constraints, utilize your strategic stakeholders, document a summary of, whatever this roadblock is and the relevant information, make sure it's grounded in evidence, make sure it's aligned towards the needs of the customer. Identify a decision-making framework. Make sure that you know how this meeting will end. How is there going to be a decision made? Is there a framework? Does an executive make the final call? Meeting before the meeting with each stakeholder and decision maker. Prepare each one with the right level of content, and get them in a room together and let them battle out. Ultimately, it's our role to facilitate and to bring things to light. And, as much as, we believe that product marketing is strategy, sometimes there are other forces that be. And so, none of these things are a magic bullet, but if communication has been right all along, I think some of these tactics can help you manage roadblocks and hiccups more effectively. And with that, that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julia. You have time for a question or two.
Yes.
So let's start with one question here from the audience. Your recommended roadmap framework.
So, I have a product management background. So anything like product board or product plan, I use those same swim lanes. I typically just split it out into areas of product marketing. So I'll have sales enablement, I'll have competitive intel. And so for each of those streams, I'll typically have a roadmap that's showing, where the progress is and what things are slated next. We prioritize based with business stakeholders. And obviously, if you have a team, a larger team, I have a very small team, but if you have a large team, you can obviously make this a lot more impressive. But I've seen people even do it in Excel spreadsheets, and that works too. So I don't knock any of the methods, but I personally like product board and product plan.
Gotcha. A lot of product managers are giving product marketers, a hard time, saying that, they do all the heavy lifting and it's the product marketers who are getting in their way. So having been in both roles, what are your top tips for working with product managers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I think if we look at what product management has been as a discipline, right? So product management about 10, 15 years ago, it was you're the CEO of the product, right?
Yeah.
And I think, so product managers were doing all of the product marketing themselves, right? They knew who their competitors were. They were doing user research. And I think in some organizations, it's still like that. And I think what there needs to be an understanding of is that one person can't do it all. It's hard to be the CEO of a product. It's hard to be the CEO in general. So I think, being able to give away your Legos and say, hey, as product marketing, I can actually elevate this for you. You maybe only have an hour a week to look at competitors. I can devote a whole, section of my roadmap to this. And so I think it's about understanding what their business outcomes are, which is ultimately that products get successfully launched to market and successfully adopted in the market, and position yourself as a product marketer as someone to help enable them. And to be honest, a lot of the product managers that I've met, they shy away from a lot of these product marketing activities because they consider themselves a lot more technical. So, they, maybe, can't draft an email or, draft a launch plan or something like that. So I think, play to your strengths and show where your value really is. But same way you would align with C-level stakeholders, align with product by aligning to their goals.
Thank you very much. Julia, it was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.